Support for WUWM podcasts comes from Hop Harvest and Vine and Good Harvest Market in Milwaukee, part of One Destination, combining farm-to-table dining, local craft beers, and organic groceries under one roof. More at goodharvestmarket.com.
From 89.7 WUWM, Milwaukee's NPR, this is Lake Effect. I'm Audrey Nowakowski. Today we'll speak with the author of a book that examines inequalities in two-parent households. Then we'll help you plan a trip to the Stevens Point Sculpture Park in a new Wandering, Wisconsin.
If you come in the fall, you might have a couple of different pieces that are there that weren't there before, or some pieces have been relocated as they've been aging. So you might come see one park one time, and you come back a year later, it might be a slightly different park or a completely different park.
Plus, as we gear up for Halloween, we'll tell you about a local fire engine house that is rumored to be haunted.
So we try not to be superstitious, but, we observe things. We experience things, and we try to make sense of it, and we can't. Gotta be a ghost.
All that's coming up on Lake Effect. This is Lake Effect from 89.7 WUWM, Milwaukee's NPR. I'm Audrey Nowakowski. Thank you so much for joining us. The nuclear family is often thought of as a pillar of American achievement. Two-parent families have been championed in both rhetoric and policy as having a key role in climbing the social ladder in the U.S. But a new book by Milwaukee-native Christina Cross is challenging this idea. Cross is a sociologist and the author of Inherited Inequality: Why Opportunity Gaps Persist Between Black and White Youth Raised in Two-Parent Families. In her new book, Cross breaks down the data along racial lines, finding that the nuclear family isn't nearly as beneficial to Black Americans as it has been for white Americans. Cross joins Lake Effect's Joy Powers to talk about her findings and how prioritizing two-parent families has shaped U.S. policy for decades.
Now, your book is really exploring a prevailing theory on familial success in the U.S., specifically this idea that the two-parent home is perhaps the ultimate equalizing force in American communities. Can you dig into that idea a bit?
Yes, well, this is an idea that's been deeply ingrained in sort of American culture and politics, and even academic research for decades. It started about 60 years ago with a report called the Moynihan Report that was focused on trying to understand the root causes of high rates of poverty among Black Americans. And Moynihan was a sociologist himself who was working in government under President Lyndon Johnson as his Assistant Secretary of Labor. And Moynihan, after about 3 months of research, concluded that at the root of high rates of poverty amongst Black Americans in the US at that time were issues of family structure, in particular high rates of single mother families and relatively higher numbers of children being born outside of marriage. And so this idea has grown and proliferated over time. It's found its way into media, it's found its way into policy, but also into academic research as well. And there are some social scientists who argue that the two-parent family is the ideal arrangement to raise children in, and it offers them the best chance of success. I think about a recent book published by Brad Wilcox called Get Married that makes that argument in particular.
As you say, this is an incredibly pervasive idea even today. Now, the Moynihan Report came out quite a while ago at this point, but there has been a lot done with the idea that this is accurate. This is an accurate perception. How has this ideal of the two-parent home impacted, especially policy and research in the U.S.?
Recently there have been estimates by family scholars and by historians suggesting that there are over 1,000 laws, policies, and practices that advantage marriage in the two-parent family over all other types of families in the U.S. So it's had a broad impact on the way that our government regulates society. One particular piece of legislation is the Personal Responsibility Work Opportunity Reconciliation Act. that was passed in 1996. And this piece of legislation is really important for a number of reasons, but one, because it created what we now refer to as welfare, the official name being Temporary Assistance for Needy Families. And this is our primary program for providing cash assistance to low income families with children. And this program, TANF, three of its goals focus on promoting marriage and a two-parent family as part of a federal strategy to improve child well-being, but also to reduce inequality, including along racial lines. So they're received with one of the most prominent safety net programs of our time, how these ideas have been baked into the goals of the program. But of course, it's not limited to policy, even though that's really important and powerful for shaping our lives. But it's also an idea that comes up in a number of academic studies as well. And I mentioned the book Get Married. There was also another book recently written called The Two-Parent Privilege by an economist by the name of Melissa Kearney. And while their arguments differ, there's consensus amongst these two social scientists and others who are of similar mindset that one of the most important ways for Americans to close gaps between the haves and have-nots is to get married, is to raise children within the context of a two-parent family.
Now, of course, these other sociologists, these other researchers, they're also relying on numbers and charts and, the kinds of evidence that one might want for this kind of claim. What do you think they have failed to see in their research that you were able to find in this book?
Well, there are two very important things to keep in mind that help to sort of square the evidence between my book and other books that have been recently published. The first and really important thing is that prior to my book, a lot of the research had focused on looking at the average sort of benefit of living in a two-parent family, relying on nationally representative data, which in general is, helpful information to have. But what that means is that we get effect across all racial and ethnic groups in the US, across all income groups as well. What I found in my book and what I focus on is what the effect or what the benefit of living in a two-parent family is, specifically for African American children. And unfortunately, they don't reap the same rewards as sort of the average benefit, and especially as their white peers who also grew up in two-parent families, which is why it's really important to, understand what the average return on this family structure is, but also to look within groups. And there had been very, very little research that had explored what it means to live in a two-parent family for African American children. When I was doing background research for my book, I only found 2 studies out of nearly 200 in the past decade that had examined the outcomes of Black children in two-parent families. So you have to be careful not to overgeneralize. The other thing that I think is really important to remember and is a key distinction in the arguments that I'm making versus other scholars is that while children who live in a two-parent family do tend to outperform their peers who live in other types of families, we have to be careful to not confuse correlation with causation. And what do I mean there? Well, it's possible that living in a two-parent family tends to be associated with better outcomes for children, but that doesn't necessarily mean that it causes the better outcomes for children. And there's this causal question that we have to really keep in mind. What I found in my research, and actually what has been shown in other studies as well, is that while children who live in two-parent families tend to perform better on average than those in other arrangements, a lot of that has to do with the conditions that typically accompany living in a two-parent family, like higher income, like more monitoring and supervision. Now the question becomes, are those things possible? Are they available in other types of family structures? And if they are, then is the two-parent family required to guarantee children's success? That's the question.
Sure. It seems like when the Moynihan Report was first commissioned, part of what it was trying to do was figure out a way to combat racial inequities. As you dug into the numbers here, as you were looking at different markers of success, what did you actually find as you looked at the impact of two-parent homes?
Yes. So what I found is that on average, and similar to other research, children who live in two-parent families tend to outperform their peers who live in single-parent families. However, the resources and outcomes of the two-parent family are drastically different between Black and white children who grew up in this arrangement. Black children face a substantial educational and labor market disadvantage relative to their white peers who grow up in two-parent families. And what this means is that, contrary to popular belief, the two-parent family is not this great equalizer that for decades we have been led to believe. Inequality is still high between children who grow up in the socially promoted two-parent family.
This is Lake Effect. I'm Joy Powers, and I'm speaking right now with Christina Cross, author of Inherited Inequality. One of the interesting things you confront in this book is simply that people have a hard time accepting this counter narrative that two-parent homes may not be the cure-all that some hope. Why is that?
First, I want to acknowledge that this is a very common belief. It's a belief that, as we talked about a bit earlier, is longstanding. But also, I'll say that I myself grew up in Milwaukee, Wisconsin, believing in the power of the two-parent family. It's ingrained in our culture. It's ingrained in what we see on television, what's presented in the media. And so we've had for a very long time this story about the power of the two-parent family for closing gaps in inequality between racial groups. And when we don't have much evidence to the contrary, when we haven't actually explored what it means to live in a two-parent family, which is what my book does, it's easy to go along with that story because there's nothing to question or challenge our assumptions, which is why I believe my book is so important to be able to offer us some actual evidence about the power and limits of the two-parent family for shaping children's well-being, but also reducing racial inequality.
With that in mind, as you think about your audience reading this book, what do you hope they take away? What do you hope they get from this book?
Stories, as we have witnessed from this story about family structure, are incredibly powerful in shaping the way that we think about a problem like racial inequality, but also what kinds of solutions that we come up with to address it. And for so long, the story about racial inequality had been a story about family structure and the fact that certain groups, like African Americans, did not live in the quote unquote right family structure. And if only they could embody the two-parent nuclear family, this would really level the playing field for them and other groups. Well, I love to change that story. That's what my book seeks to do. It seeks to help us better understand what the consequences of living in a two-parent family are, help us to realize that there can be real benefits for children of all groups, but that the two-parent family is no cure-all. It's no panacea. And without additional support, without additional government action, unfortunately, racial inequality will persist.
What do you see as some solutions to create real equality or at least drive toward equality?
That's a great question. And the answer to that is partly rooted in why opportunity gaps exist between Black and white children from two-parent families in the first place. So, what I found is that one of the key driver of gaps and outcomes between children was actually differences in access to economic resources. So, Black children in two-parent families had only access to about 60% of the household income and 25% of the household wealth of white children in two-parent families. So there are these really substantial gaps in economic resources, and that's what's leading to this inequality between the two groups. So if we want to turn things around, we have to figure out ways to close gaps in economic resources. And there have been a number of recent policies that have helped to bolster the resources of families that were struggling or that were even middle income that we can rely on. For example, we can think about the child tax credit during the COVID-19 pandemic that actually helped to lift millions of children out of poverty. It really helped to significantly improve the financial standing of millions of American households. Unfortunately, at this time, we are experiencing the opposite of that, with there being massive cuts to public spending on families. We were not able to continue with the expanded child tax credit, but there have also been cuts to SNAP and Medicaid and Children's Health Insurance Program, or even disaster relief. And all of these things make it harder for families to stay afloat, but it also magnifies gaps in economic resources. So, moving in actually the opposite direction that we're in now, I think is really important if we want to help level the playing field.
Yeah, it's difficult in a landscape where it seems like a lot of resources are being pulled away to really address these kinds of inequalities and not exacerbate them.
Exactly.
Well, Christina, thank you so much for joining us here on Lake Effect and sharing your work.
Thank you. This has been wonderful. Thanks for having me.
Christina Cross is a Milwaukee native and an assistant professor of sociology at Harvard University. She spoke with Lake Effect's Joy Powers about her new book, Inherited Inequality: Why Opportunity Gaps Persist Between Black and White Youth Raised in Two-Parent Families. Did you know you can listen to Lake Effect as a podcast? Search for Lake Effect wherever you get your podcasts to download and listen to us on demand. In about 15 minutes, we'll explore a local fire engine house that's supposedly haunted. But first, we'll learn about the Stevens Point Sculpture Park and help you plan a trip there in a new Wandering Wisconsin. Keep listening to Lake Effect on WUWM. You're listening to Lake Effect on 89.7 WUWM. I'm Audrey Nowakowski. For this month's Wandering Wisconsin, we're heading to Stevens Point. There's a sculpture park nestled in the woods there. You'll find mind-bending pieces like an outhouse on stilts, a haunting elk centaur, and an oversized bench fit for a giant. The art is scattered across a trail with perfect views of the fall leaves. To share more about the Stevens Point Sculpture Park, Lake Effect's Becky Mortensen is joined by Park Board member Kiba Freeman and Travel Wisconsin's Amanda Weibel.
It is a beautiful time for a walk through the woods in Wisconsin as the leaves are changing color. And if you travel to Stevens Point, there's a trail you can walk there that provides something extra to take in. Kiba, can you begin by just describing the Stevens Point Sculpture Park?
Sure. Sculpture Park is fantastic, not even exaggerating. So it's a nice nature trail. It's like 30 acres, but the trail itself isn't super long. And it's filled with both natural landscape, and we've added and embedded a bunch of different sculptures from artists throughout Wisconsin, throughout the states, and even a couple from abroad. And it's kind of a rotating exhibit in a gallery. So we have certain pieces that come and go as their time elapses or as their lifespan elapses. But throughout the year, you'll have different art pieces in there, different ones that are there throughout the time that kind of change with the background, with the scenery.
And there is a big range of art on this walk, as you mentioned, everything from metalwork to woodwork, even some things that kind of look like they should be part of the landscape. Could you describe maybe a couple of the featured pieces people can see in the park?
Yes. So by far, some of the most popular pieces, one is a elk centaur, and it's kind of off in a marshy area of the woods, a little bit off the trail, but a lot of people find it, and depending on the time of day or what the lighting is, it can probably give you a good jump scare. But it typically garners attention online when folks find out about it. They come visit the sculpture park. They take cool photos of it and post it on the internet, and people are like, "Where's this thing located?" Um, and so it's always kind of fun to see that whenever that kicks back in. Another one that's really popular is a giant cube that's movable. It's on a contraption that allows it to be spun, and it's three-dimensional, and a lot of folks really enjoy experience it, seeing it, but also giving it a good push to see how far they can get it to move.
And you mentioned there's kind of a cycle of the pieces kind of coming and going. How often is new art added or changed in the park?
The committee aims to add new art every year, generally between 1 and 3 pieces are added every year. We do an open call to artists to submit ideas, and we offer a payment amount for the rental of the piece. And then after the rental time of that piece has elapsed, we either renew that rental, pursue a potential purchasing, or the piece can sometimes get donated to the park as well if the artist that created it was like, it's such a part of the park now. I don't want to take it with me. I don't want to move it. It should stay there. That's happened before. So typically, at least 1 to 3 new pieces are added every year. And then there are some that have been there since the inception of the park in 2009, that have been there for quite a long time.
How is the art funded and the park maintained?
The park is owned by the city, and it's maintained by the Parks and Rec Department of the city, and with the advice of the committee, of the Sculpture Park Committee. And funding this is a nonprofit organization. Stevens Point Sculpture Park is a nonprofit, and so all of our funding is generally grant oriented. We apply for a lot of grants, a lot of donation in kind stuff, community donations, and then sometimes we'll put on events that helps to um, garner support for the park or garner funds to help pay for things like the sculptures that we get added. We try to provide a reasonable amount of money for artists that are adding sculptures to the park. In order to do that, we gotta get money somehow. So we put on events, and we do fundraising opportunities, and we get a decent amount of grants. Not as many grants this year because it's been an interesting year for grants for a lot of nonprofits, but that's generally how we pay for things and how things are taken care of.
Mm-hmm. So you mentioned a few of the pieces that are really popular with people. Do you have a standout or a favorite or one you want to make sure people check out when they're there?
You know, there's so many unique pieces, and it really depends on when you come because the piece that I might find super unique today may be there again the when you come to visit, or it may have ended its life cycle or not. But the ones that I think that people definitely should try to locate, what are they called? Sky outhouse boxes. I think that's the title of it. But it basically looks like a tree house. It's just kind of fairly high up above head height, and you can just all of a sudden you look up and see this tree house, and it's a unique looking tree house in the distance. But there's also this one upside down house that's in the park at one of the entrances, that I feel always grabs a lot of our people's attention. So there's a bunch of different cool things in there, and some things like you mentioned are made of wood. Some things are made of metal. Some things are made of recycled material. Some things are meant to be weathered, and the weathered look is kind of part of the piece. There's such a range. It's kind of hard to pick some favorites.
Okay, Kiva, I have to ask you about one piece in particular. There's a piece called Second Chance. It looks like repurposed metal, kind of made into like a deer or an elk. It has a sweater on. Like it's like it has like a crocheted sweater. And I was like, this doesn't seem like it's part of the original piece. But yeah, what can you tell me about that?
I forget the exact story on how that kind of, I don't want to say tradition started, but one of the artists or a couple artists collaborated to make a sweater for it. And over time, those things wear because it's Wisconsin and we have all the seasons. And someone's taken up the mantle to continue to make sure that sweater is either redone or a scarf is added. And so it's kind of I want to say a little guerrilla warfare added art, but like it's some art that a couple community members are continue to add to that piece in relation with the artist to make sure it was like okay to do. But it was just kind of a fun thing originally that someone is continuing to do. It is kind of a cool little addition to that piece.
Okay, I love that. Mystery solved. There's somebody coming out here and putting a sweater on this guy. That's awesome. So
Yeah, absolutely. It's awesome.
So this is just a small park off of the Green Circle Trail in Stevens Point. Amanda, can you talk a bit about the rest of the Green Circle Trail and what hiking is like there?
The Green Circle Trail is really a labor of love from the entire community. Since 1989, local residents, businesses, and partners have all worked together to build and maintain this trail, and it now loops through the Stevens Point area for 27 miles. It's great for hiking and biking, and one of the most unique pieces of it is that it covers such a diversity of landscapes. You're going to go through parks and along rivers, over wetlands, and into these towering pine forests. One standout spot to check out along the trail is the Schmeekley Reserve. It has these beautiful boardwalks and accessible paths looping around a small lake, and people have been known to see deer just calmly grazing a few feet off the path here.
And as I mentioned, this is a great time to be outdoors. What else might people want to check out on a visit to the Stevens Point area where they can enjoy those fall colors?
The Stevens Point area has so much to offer for nature lovers. The Wisconsin, Plover, and Tomorrow rivers all flow through the area, and these are really ideal destinations to get in some fall paddling before the season ends. The fall colors look so gorgeous when they reflect off of the water's surface, so it's really a fun time to be out on the water. Another option to take in the colors is Standing Rocks County Park. This is a really popular destination for mountain biking. They have 13 miles of single track trails and also have several disc golf courses at the park if you're looking for a more laid back way to take in the fall color. And then finally, I recommend checking out the Tropical Conservatory at UW Stevens Point for some more greenery. It is open to the public and it features 300 different tropical plant species. So that's kind of a fun option if you want to warm up on a chillier fall day.
Yeah, nice. And Stevens Point has a pretty active downtown area with shops and restaurants. What other places would you recommend people stop in at while they're there on a visit?
Stevens Point really packs in a whole lot, Becky. Another great option if you want to warm up after spending some time outdoors is Nordic Night. This is a wood-fired communal sauna that's tucked away just a couple of blocks from downtown. If you're looking for an awesome lunch spot, I definitely recommend Main Grain Bakery and Eatery. They use freshly baked breads and sandwich together some really creative ingredient spreads and toppings. I also recommend checking out Great Northern Distilling for a great crafted cocktail. One of their most unique spirits is a ginseng-infused whiskey. It's made with ginseng harvested from nearby Marathon County. And then finally, we're heading into the holiday season, so take some time to stroll downtown Stevens Point and find a perfect gift for a loved one. Geppetto's Workshop is a locally owned toy store. They have really unique quality toys. You can find something for the outdoorsy person in your life at Fall Line Outfitters, or maybe you want to pick up a variety of tea. They have infused vinegars and specialty oils at Diversity.
And Century World seems to be a big draw to this area. What can you tell me about that?
Yes, Century World is a world-class golf course. It's also a full-service resort that appeals to a lot of different interests. Century Insurance first opened the Century World Golf Course in 1982, and it has consistently ranked as one of the country's best public courses ever since. The icon of the course is the flower hole. It is surrounded by 33,000 flowers on the green, so it's really, really stunning. You're going to want to spend the night at the Inn at Century World. It's a boutique hotel that opened a few years ago. It's going to absolutely wow you. You'll feel a welcoming, upscale Wisconsin charm throughout the inn. The grand lobby is known as the living room, and they have blankets available for guests. You can snuggle up under the roaring fireplace. The guest rooms are also outfitted with luxury amenities. Many of them have private balconies that overlook the course. You can also typically rent bikes from their on-site outfitter. They're a really ideal way to experience the nearby Green Circle Trail. And I highly suggest checking out Muse at Century. This is a fine dining restaurant that's located inside the headquarters of the insurance company. You're going to be surrounded by this backdrop of beautiful artwork. They have a ton of award-winning wines, and the dishes really are of exceptional taste and presentation.
Okay, and back to the sculpture park. I do feel like this is a place that has a lot of intrigue. It feels like you're searching for the next surprise around every corner as you go on this walk through the woods. And if you don't look closely enough, you might miss some of the art. So, what do you think sets the sculpture park apart from other public art installations?
There are so many cool things about Stevens Point Sculpture Park. Um, One, just how it, as Amanda mentioned, is right off of the Green Circle Trail. So you will get a mixture of people that are there on foot, that are there coming. They found their way there because they were out biking or out for a walk with their pets. And all of a sudden, they're surrounded by artwork. And I'll say that when you come to Stevens Point Sculpture Park, you come expecting artwork to just be in your face the whole time. And it is a great blend of how it's embedded in the landscape and how some pieces do stand out a lot more than others. There's a variety of artwork, there's a variety of nature aspects. It's a beautiful park. We have wonderful events that we put on in the park, including event that we recently started doing called Lit, where we do a nighttime event in the park. Artists come and illuminate some of the sculptures so that you get a different view and different light of all these art pieces. So there's so many cool things about Stevens Point Sculpture Park. And as a birder, I do also enjoy going there with my kids and seeing what kind of cool birds we can find along with artwork.
Yeah, great place for birding. I can second that.
I think that what also makes this park super unique is every time you visit, it could be slightly different or very different. You know, you can come to the park, you can see it for a series of times in a season. Say you come in the spring. If you come in the fall, you might have a couple of different pieces that are there that weren't there before, or some pieces have been relocated to different locations that better suit them as they've been aging. So you might come see one park one time and you come back a year later, it might be a slightly different park or a completely different park. So I think that's pretty cool as well.
Absolutely. Well, Kiba and Amanda, thank you so much for joining me for Wandering Wisconsin.
Thanks for having us.
This is great. I love this conversation.
Kiba Freeman is an artist and a board member of the Stevens Point Sculpture Park. Amanda Weibel is the communications officer for Travel Wisconsin. They both joined Lake Effect's Becky Mortensen for our Wandering Wisconsin series, where we help you plan a trip right here in our home state. You can find other Wisconsin travel recommendations at wuwm.com. The library is more than just books, and our series with the Milwaukee Public Library, Books and Beyond, showcases that by sharing resources, book recommendations, and just some cool stuff you might not know about. Today, we are showcasing some spooky Milwaukee history, the haunting of Engine House 35. The firehouse is located at 64th and Fairview Avenue, and the building isn't that old. It opened in January of 1999. But it's what it was built on that reportedly makes it hospitable to ghosts, the former site of the Fairview Mausoleum. To find out more about the mausoleum's history, I spoke with librarian Dan Lee, who looked into the location in Milwaukee Public Library's cemetery collection. This collection includes historic burial records on microfilm dating back to the 1800s into the 20th century.
The Fairview Mausoleum opened up shortly before World War I, 1912 through 1914, and people were buried there up until the 1990s. But it did have financial problems because it did go bankrupt in the 1950s. And then finally, in 1994, it reached the point where they couldn't maintain the mausoleum, and they realized that it was just cost prohibitive to maintain it and also to bury people as well. And what happened at that time was that the city, through the Department of City Development, took it over. And then the decision was made, what do we do with the remains before building a fire station? And then they were fortunate enough to find that the Graceland Cemetery was willing to become the new home of the eternal visitors at Fairview, who were there for a few decades or close to a century, and they were just relocated.
Fairview isn't the only cemetery relocation in Milwaukee County, according to Lee. There are close to a dozen cemeteries that have been closed in the county dating back to the 1950s.
We have a map in our collection called the Milwaukee County Cemetery Map that is kept at the desk in the Frank Seidler Humanities Room. And on one side, there's a map of Milwaukee County with all the active cemeteries marked on there. And then on the back, there's a list of removed cemeteries.
Moving remains takes a lot of planning and work, And an inventory was done at the time the city took over Fairview, recording when they moved the deceased from the mausoleum to Graceland Cemetery. Lee shares a few details in the records that stood out to him as he was going through the cemetery archives.
Catherine Crosby was a survivor from the Titanic, and she died 8 years after the 1912 sinking in 1920. And on the crypt niche inventory, it reads, died July 29th, 1920, and that's on the plaque. And it mentions that actually it doesn't have that much information on her. Some of the other, people, there is more descriptive information, but unfortunately that's not the case with Catherine Crosby.
So what about some of the more descriptive information you were able to find?
Well, since, Station 35 is there is actually a person who apparently was a firefighter. Unfortunately, the printing of his first name isn't that good, so that I'm not sure if his first name is Redhold or Redenhold. His last name is Isleb, I-S-L-E-B, Redhold Isleb. The note here reads, wearing firefighter uniform with bow tie, and the plaque reads, at rest.
That's kind of an amazing connection there. I wonder if he's one of the ghosts that haunts the station that we've heard stories about.
It's a case of 6 degrees of separation.
Other details in the Fairview records include some specific notes that describe the condition of objects like caskets or what clothes people were buried in.
Augusta Isleb, apparently she was dressed with a large ribbon, gold-colored ring, and black shoes. I guess they found that noteworthy when they were doing this inventory. And the last Isleb that caught my eye, it says here on the urn, Isleb infant, name Pauline Isleb, and the note says infant Isleb, and this actually does have a death or burial date. It appears to read May 9th, 1910, and was identified by the ribbon on the urn. Her casket was described as cloth, and apparently her casket was in this case, the urn was in a good condition because it said none for casket deterioration, and she was dressed in a black dress with gold pattern.
999 people of all ages and backgrounds were moved from the Fairview Mausoleum to Graceland Cemetery, so I suppose it's possible some spirits are sticking around. To get a firefighter's perspective, I spoke with the City of Milwaukee Fire Department's chief, Aaron Lipsky, who's worked in the department for almost 30 years. According to Lipsky, there's always been a good and strong collection of people who have worked out of Firehouse 35, and firefighters who first occupied the station in 1999 were very aware of the site's history. In fact, the fire station's nickname is the Crypt Keeper.
Nicknames at fire stations sometimes come and go, but that one has stuck. There's a lot of lore in some of our fire stations about such things. They were on hallowed ground. They were on the site where people's family had been interred, and so anything that might occur oddball was instantly seized on, and the stories made the rounds very rapidly in the fire department.
Yeah, so what are some of those stories? And it's been reported, as you said, by firefighters who have worked there, that ghosts or spirits kind of come and go, usually the cause of some mischief, mostly harmless, but what are some of the stories that have been shared within the fire department?
So it's a pretty wide variety. There's always the opportunity for you to hear oddball noises in a fire station. You've got different people who are in different spots, but numerous instances of noises being heard, and when people have gone to investigate, there is nobody in that area, and there's no way they could have been in that area without you seeing them on the way in. Pots and pans flying off stoves. There was a few reports of actual sightings at night, folks awakening and there being a figure standing next to the bed. And I believe the one report was so specific as to they were dressed in, the clothing of eras gone by, that it was very obviously not one of their co-workers. So like an apparition. There's been numerous reports of being in a certain spot in the fire station and all of a sudden feeling a very, very pronounced cold draft and chill pass right through you. Now, maybe that was just an oddball thing with the HVAC system and the AC, like, right? It could be any of those things, but when you're aware that's where you're working, it seems weird. And the folks that talked about those things were very specific that, no, this was not that. This was something extra. And I think the one report that was very consistent, and we checked everything over and over again in the building mechanically, was that you could go to take a shower after a fire to clean off, or in the morning if you're getting ready to start work and you're going to take a shower, and you would end up with just freezing cold water no matter what you did. And that it could change. You could get in, it could be, okay, there's a nice warm normal shower, and all of a sudden it would just change and go. And that's not normal, right? That's not how plumbing works, unless you absolutely run a hot water heater, down to nothing. But even then you get a gradual. So that was something a lot of people have remarked on over the years. Again, maybe there's some weird oddball thing with that plumbing, but it's built where a mausoleum used to be. So of course it's a ghost.
Lipsky says he's never personally experienced any spooky, unexplainable scenarios, but that doesn't mean he doesn't believe other people's experiences. Given the kind of juxtaposition of firefighters being logical, you're sorting out what you're observing, and yet not discounting people's experiences, would you say you believe in ghosts or spirits?
Yeah, I think there is I think probably, especially in today's day and age, you could easily be framed to sound like some sort of quack to even suggest that you believe in that. But I will tell you, I have seen human beings do, beyond just firefighters, regular citizens, I've seen them do superhuman, unbelievable things in the face of horrible danger and at great risk to themselves. And I've seen our own firefighters do that time and again. And I have to believe there are other energies at work. And I've seen stuff with my own eyes that I can't make sense of, that our folks have gone into and out of, and they've been successful at a rescue. You have to believe there's some other energy, whatever you call it, whatever a person's belief system is, there is something larger at work here. I think that's the best way to say it.
Despite the firehouse's reputation, Lipsky says no one protests being assigned there or tries to leave, even if they've experienced their own encounters.
We had the one gentleman at Station 35, the crypt keepers, reports waking up and feeling a very heavy pressure on his body. This is late at night. He was able to sleep for a little bit, and a very heavy pressure pressing down on his body to the point that he actually had a bruise when he woke up, right? But he was in an isolated area again. But none of those folks ever said, no, I got to get out of here.
Today, the firehouse is still operated by the Milwaukee Fire Department, but also shares the building with Wauwatosa's Engine 55. So there's always some company for the ghosts.
We were afraid of all the ghosts, so we stuck Tosa in there.
Exactly. Just didn't tell them.
That's right. Let them find out on their own.
If you've had your own ghostly encounter and want to find out more about where they might be buried, librarian Dan Lee says you can start your research by going online to look at the cemetery collection before coming into Central Library to dig through the records.
People can go online to npl.org and click on the green research button near the top right, and there's a drop-down menu, and they'll see our genealogy page. And on the genealogy page, they'll see the Milwaukee County Records Research at Milwaukee Public Library page. And that will list the cemeteries, what we have on microfilm, so that the actual information hasn't been digitized and posted online, but they know that we have it, so patrons can come in and look at them on microfilm.
Happy ghost hunting and happy Halloween. We'll take one more break, then tell you about a self-guided walk through Milwaukee's River West neighborhood that'll take you past some houses decorated in different Halloween themes. That's next on Lake Effect on Milwaukee's NPR. This is Lake Effect on 89.7 WUWM. I'm Audrey Nowakowski. If you're looking for a Halloween activity this week, why not take a walk to see some neighborhood decorations? One Milwaukee neighborhood is stepping up its game with a walking tour featuring ghost stories based on homes in the neighborhood. The River West Radio Ghost Walk is both a fundraiser for the community radio station and an opportunity to explore the neighborhood through the Ghost Walk tour book. It's filled with routes and hair-raising tales. Jill Capacchione is the creator of the Ghost Walk, and she joins Lake Effect's Joy Powers to share more.
Tell us a little bit about this tour. How did this come to fruition?
We'll have to give full credit to my previous neighborhood, Brewers Hill. They had done a similar event before I moved to Milwaukee in the early 2000s. And I thought to revive that idea and do it as a fundraiser for River West Radio would be a really great thing for the neighborhoods of River West and Harambe. So I kind of got the idea when I started looking into it further. An old neighbor had a copy of the book that Brewers Hill had put together back in, I think, 2003, maybe. So she got me a copy of the book, which was really important to be able to share with potential advertisers so that they understood what the event was about. Because it's been a little hard to get people to understand what it was without showing them the book of the stories and being able to explain to them that it's not on a particular day. It's like not a guided ghost walking tour, that it's a self-guided tour. So getting to that was a little bit challenging, but we got there. And through the help of many creative folks, I've been able to compile a book of ghost stories with a map. And the locations have decorated their locations, homes, and businesses in the theme of the ghost story that was written about their property.
Very nice. Now, as you mentioned, this is a self-guided tour, and it does go into both Harambe and River West. I would say it's largely in River West. What is the scope of this tour?
It's actually quite large. If you look on a map, I actually, in just kind of eyeballing it, if you were going to walk the whole thing, I would probably break it up into 2, maybe 3 walks. You probably wouldn't want to do it all at once, especially with the it getting dark pretty early and not wanting to be out super late. So I'd say if you're walking it, you might want to group it into 2 or 3 walks, but it goes as far north as Keefe Avenue and then as far south as just a little bit shy of North Avenue, and then as far west as, I think, Buffum Street.
As you mentioned, these stories are largely fiction, but they are a bit of a mix of pure fiction and then some legends from the neighborhood. Mm-hmm. What are some of the kind of stranger-than-fiction stories that are based in kind of legends of River West?
Well, my favorite has to be the Baba Yaga hut. So there is a house in River West that is always decorated on the outside with these dolls. And if you were to bring it up on Google Maps, it will say it's the Baba Yaga hut, and it's only open, I think, from midnight to 2 a.m. So that's probably the one that piqued my interest when I started putting together the idea of the ghost tour. I left handwritten notes on a handful of homes around the neighborhood that I thought might be Halloween enthusiasts and might want to contribute or participate. And so that was one of the homes. So I was pretty excited when I got an email back from Baba Yaga at Gmail, wanting to, agreeing to participate and wanting someone else to pen the story about how Baba Yaga arrived in River West.
Now, not to give too much of the story away, but what are kind of the contours of the Baba Yaga story?
It's a, I think, Eastern European tale of I think it's kind of like the Eastern European tale of the Witch in the Woods, kind of Hansel and Gretel type story. So that's the kind of folklore that surrounds it. And there is the Baba Yaga house itself is legend to have chicken legs. So kind of interesting.
Now, what are you looking forward to most as you get into this tour?
I'm just really hoping to encourage neighbors and maybe people from outside of the neighborhood to come and enjoy the spirit of Halloween in the neighborhoods. I've noticed as I've been walking around the area that with every house that's officially on the tour, there are at least 1 to 3 homes very adjacent to those homes that are hugely decorated for Halloween. So I'm most excited to kind of share the River West and Harambe spirit of Halloween with the rest of the surrounding neighborhoods.
Very nice. Well, Jill, thank you so much for joining us here on Lake Effect.
Thank you so much.
Jill Capacchione is the creator of the River West Radio Ghost Walk, and she joined Lake Effect's Joy Powers. And that's all for today's show. I'm Audrey Nowakowski. If you've missed any of Lake Effect this week, you can find all of our conversations at wuwm.com. If you'd like to take the show on the go, you can download the Lake Effect podcast wherever you get your podcasts. Tomorrow on Lake Effect, we'll learn about the successful campaign by a local organization to bring participatory budgeting to Milwaukee. Plus, we'll learn about a tracking system that helps us better understand bird migration. That's in a new episode of Chirp Chat. Thank you so much for joining us today, right here on listener-supported 89.7 WUWM, Milwaukee's NPR.